Welcome to the e-commerce growth show, brought to you by Segmentify.
So hello everyone, this is Carlos with Evolve. I'm here today joined by Carl Boutet, who's in Canada, and Scott Emmons, both retail influencers. And Scott, you're welcome to open the show, the e-commerce growth series here. So thank you very much.
All right, Carlos. So thank you for that. And hello, everyone, and especially welcome, Carl, to our little chat today. I'm coming to you from Dallas, Texas, where I have been sort of sheltered in place since January, and it feels like forever. Where are you coming from, Carl?
I'm coming from Montreal, where I've been sheltered in place since March. So you're once again, Scott, you're an innovator and an early adopter, because I'm behind the times with you there. Again, in January, I was actually in China, in Shanghai. So that's without knowing that I was at the epicenter of something that was going to put us all in this lockdown. But yes, now in Montreal, from the same basement as I've been since March.
Awesome. Awesome. At least I have a window to look out, so I have that going for me. So I mean, just a quick introduction to listeners that may not be familiar with what Carl's been up to. Right, he's the founder and chief strategist at Studio RX, as well as he has multiple other projects that we'll touch upon. I think today he's been doing this kind of retail consulting and thinking about retail innovation for a long time, for 25 years or so, as what it looked like when I looked up your bio. I saw you describe yourself as the retail prescriptor. When I checked out what was going on over in LinkedIn, which I thought was really interesting and unique. And we're very excited, to get some of your views and thoughts today, Carl. So let's just start, with a general question, from your viewpoint and understanding the world, in as crazy a place as it's been in our lifetime, in my opinion. What are you seeing in the world of retail right now that is encouraging or concerning for you?
Well, let's start with the encouraging part. I hosted a panel yesterday with four with local Canadian brands that were three of the four were in the food service sort of side of retail, and one was in more the hygiene side, and to the resilience that this pandemic is building up is really impressive. And the fact that these companies, one was a chocolate company, and one was a coffee company, and the third one was a sports bar chain, a large sport bar chain, which would be the hardest hit. And seeing their resilience and how they pivoted, for the instance of the sports bar chain, which was really your beer and wings destination to go watch the fight. They actually own a boxing promoting company as well, a large one here. So to be hit that hard, to use sort of that build on that analogy, and still kind of keep on swinging. So they went into meal kit, and they're doing all this sort of all the moves, trying to remain relevant, and so this resilience, this is building up, and the conclusion, they all had great stories of pivots they all had to make, and they all had surprisingly similar stories around being in mid-March, presenting to their board their 3 and 5 year strategic plans that were sort of just building on what they already had, and how they just had to throw that all out and sort of start from scratch. But that for me was it's encouraging to hear those stories. The less encouraging part is obviously the ones that aren't able, don't have the resources, or just aren't set up to make those changes. So that's why we talk about this acceleration so much, and the fact that a lot of the people that were unfortunately were headed in the wrong direction just got there quicker than they thought, and others were heading in the right direction, also getting there quicker than they thought. So that's sort of the good and the bad and the ugly of the situation right now.
Would you? So really, I was really interested to hear what was happening in Canada. Part of that story. We've been, really immersed here in, stories like JCPenney's and the Neiman Marcus bankruptcy. Obviously, was very interesting to me considering my background. What's some interesting new innovation. Like I just saw Target and Ulta, for instance, announced a new partnership yesterday that I thought was fascinating to talk about. So, one of the very important mentors in my life, John Corral, actually ended up going to Canadian Tire, up there. And so when you think about a retailer like Canadian Tire, what is it that they're doing or should be doing to be better, in a world where, kind of physical face-to-face retail is problematic?
Yeah, it's a good example because Canadian Tires are an iconic, legacy retail brand. It's very much brick and mortar based. They've been slow in the digital transformation. They've taken different kicks at it, and as you know well, Scott, I mean, large organizations and especially ones that are complex that have sort of a web of stakeholders like Canadian Tire would with dealers and all that stuff makes it the resistance to change that much more entrenched. And they committed early, to digital transformation, which is great. I mean, the theory of it is fantastic, and the technology is there to support it all day long. The struggle is the cultural one, and sort of building the internal strengths to do that. And not, you can hire a bunch of smart people, like yourself, Scott, and then bring them in, but you know what it is how hard steering change can be. So this pandemic, I think, really put that in their face. So one of, a very basic example I can share in their specific cases, they really pulled forward their whole transition to curbside pickup, something they've been toying around with for years and years. I mean, they've had e-com fulfillment for a while. They've started not so long ago to have visibility of inventory into the store online. So this is sort of the natural progression of it. And up to this point, they were mainly POCs, proof of concepts that they were playing out, and they had no choice. They had to step up and do you really offer that curbside pickup? Was it perfect? No, I've used an example in other conversations like these I've had, showing the difference between technology and culture, because I think it's a good one. The technology was great. How you operationalize it in the back end and get the people to buy in and get this, the people at the dealer level to pay attention to it and want to fulfill, because my order online takes 8 seconds to complete. If I have to wait in a parking lot for 55 minutes for the person to come out with my order and put it in my trunk, just that's where maybe things start falling apart. But listen, they're pushing in the right direction, and yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, they're very dependent on their merchandising, it being in store, and the treasure hunt and all that stuff. So we'll see how they evolve. What's interesting is they're also a larger corporation behind them. They're acquiring other things along the way. They're heavy into sporting goods. They've been acquiring brands like Helly Hansen, which is an interesting move. So lots going on, but I think my concern, and I've seen this play out for the last, like you mentioned, 25 years, the big like Canadian Tire, which only a couple of years ago thought that they were king of the realm, are quickly realizing that they're regional players. And this is something you would have probably witnessed as well at, working in Neiman, where you thought you ran the show. And the next thing you know, there's people coming in from all sides that are probably bigger than you even, and challenging your dominance. And I think Canadian Tire is stuck in that dynamic, as is a ton of other retailers.
It's interesting how often curbside pickup is the first example everyone brings up for rapid innovation, and in our pandemic times. By the time I think at some time we've got to move past that. We have to go even further, right? But and I can say, my experience, here, for instance, directly in Dallas, excellent curbside pickup experience at Walmart would be an example, at least their grocery. Not so much for their main retail, I have to say, but their grocery is amazing. And then, there's another, I won't name them, another very large home improvement, well-known home improvement retailer whose curbside pickup is hit or miss. Sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's terrible.
Well, listen, Scott, you and I know how, it's really easy to build a strategy for these, and even the tech stack to support them, to operationalize. I mean, that's what makes our industry so interesting and challenging at the same time is there's a lot of moving parts. So I can have a really nice process flow for how this is all supposed to happen. And when you go to that large hardware retailer where this should all, sort of just click, 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 but that's the real life gets messy and retail's messy. So how do you clean through that and how do you figure it out? But we have to head in the right direction. I heard this summer, Hubert Joly, the former president, CEO of Best Buy, who's now chairman, saying how they had to roll up curbside in 3 days. So to your point, I don't think curbside is this amazing innovation. It's something we've been talking about for a long time. It just now really got pushed into their face where there's the only way that they could still serve, their clientele and during lockdowns, especially, and even post that, we'll see. But it's one small example. I think there's a way more interesting stuff happening. We could talk about, some of the more cutting edge things that we're seeing, especially in Asia, where I spend a lot of time as well. And being a double 11 today is sort of fitting to speak about that. But we can get there later. But coming back to here in Canada, yeah, I mean there's a lot. We've also been through a lot of change too. Don't forget, Sears here has been closed for years already. We've already made that pivot.
It's been closed. It's been closed here for years too. They just haven't admitted it.
Okay, well, your friend in Dallas has that the longest going out of business sale in history, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the when we think about how, as you just mentioned, right? How quickly, what took 3 to 5 years before now is happening in 3 to 5 weeks, or in some, maybe even 3 to 5 days, in some cases. I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on why it took a pandemic to be the driver, for the innovation that needed to be happening for many years, to be honest, and maybe. In light of the sort of organizational friction that you also mentioned, and that I wrote a very specific op-ed about when I left. That's a very real thing. That
was a great op-ed.
That resistance to innovation, if you will. Talk the talk, but they're a lot worse at walking the walk, if you will.
Yeah. So I mean, it's listen. There's. First of all, it's interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, the groups that you and I have been part of over the years, these innovation groups that were there to sort of set the stage for change, were miraculously being sort of protected at the beginning because they were usually the first to get cut. If you think back, and our friends at Target, in 2008, and these others, like they just those were the first to get slaughtered, and this time they hung around a bit longer. But now, I mean, in the fall, unfortunately, seeing a lot of divestment there. But what provoked a lot of the other change is the fact that, I mean, the old Churchill quote that's been going around a lot, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And it came up again yesterday on our panel. It just changed fundamentally how a lot of people, the options people had. And so you had no other choice but to sort of if you wanted to keep up with them. So one of the data points that I've been using since the last couple of months now is I did a webinar with the folks from Canada Post, and Canada Post lucked out where they hired a new chief operating officer literally weeks before the pandemic hit. And this chief operating officer came from DHL eCommerce. His name's Charles Brewer. He was from Singapore. Head up DHL's e-commerce division, and Canada Post picked him up. The reason why I say he's lucky because he knows what scale is. And he has an idea of what these are. And the data point that he shared with us was when he got hired, he built out a ramp up for Canada Post parcel capabilities with a nice sort of steady chart graph that was going to go bring Canada Post over the next 10 years to sort of the fulfillment that they were expecting for parcel delivery. Well, they hit the 9-year mark back in like 2 months into the pandemic of parcel velocity that they had to handle. So this is 9 years ahead. So when you talk about three to 5 years, 3 to 5 weeks, I mean, I've been sort of coining this great acceleration concept now since March, and I'm always looking for data points to sort of back it up because there's a lot of pundits who push back, and I don't think they're all, I don't think they're all wrong. I think sometimes we have a tendency to sort of want to overemphasize the short term and forget, underemphasize the long term. But those are real data points. When the chief operating officer of Canada Post says we basically hit what we were expecting 9 years from now, That's one. And then you can replicate that in a bunch of different environments, food delivery being another big one that's sort of doing that, hitting those kind of numbers as well. The growth of other e-commerce channels too. So I think it's real. What provoked it? It's simple. I mean, people had no other choice in a lot of cases, and where it's going to be really fascinating, why I'm sort of pushing back this book launch I want to do, is Christmas. What's Christmas?
What is that going to do? If you think that what you just said about, I hit my 9-year mark in a couple of months, think about what, socially distanced Thanksgiving and Christmas mean, especially Christmas. Yeah.
So a data point fresh from today, I mean, around that in Asia. So China is actually, pretty much reopened. They've been, they nailed this a lot harder at the beginning, and now they've been able to reopen. I saw a video from Singapore as well. I mean, it's almost business as usual for them for physical commerce. So you'd say they wouldn't have necessarily the same incentives, but the trends that were driven here in the last 7-8 months aren't just going to roll back. So the data point from today was 11/11, Alibaba's infamous now Singles Day, as they used to call it. They just, they had 38 billion in GMV last year. They're already at over 70, and they still got a couple hours to go. And a lot of this is from pent up because they opened the sale a bit earlier because they wanted to make sure that they could fulfill. So that's something, a strategy right now that all retailers are trying to adopt to sort of broaden out the promotional season so that they don't get hit with such a hard peak. But they were doing a half a million transactions a second when they open the floodgates of 11.
Amazing.
So I mean, these again, we're pulling things forward here. Yeah, I mean, think about that, Scott. Think about the processing. Just, I mean, you and I, we've run POS systems. We have troubles having, running 12 transactions a second sometimes because we get bottlenecked in our legacy our legacy platforms. These guys were rolling. I think the peak number was 568,000 transactions a second.
That's unfathomable.
Exactly. I mean, really. I mean, every year we do this. Every year we go, we look at the numbers. $1 billion in the first minute, we were blown away. And then the year after that was like 10 billion in the first 30 minutes. We're like, that's impossible. I mean, every year just and again, think that the majority of their sales are still in China, although they did say US, their number one market now outside of China, and it's ramped up very quickly. They have, I think, over a dozen brands that did over $1 billion in sales and is so far with them as well in that day. So there's like the Nikes, the L'Oreals. I mean, it is mind-boggling, and it just keeps on scaling higher in an environment that, again, 80% of physical retail is still open. And there's still people going into the stores. The video I got from Singapore, I'll be sharing it on my network shortly, that a friend sent me. I mean, it looks like kind of business. You see people going around, walking in and out of stores, but there's still 550,000 transactions that are happening a second there today at the same time. So the parallels are wild.
Crazy. Yeah. So speaking of, sort of retail opening up in Asia, I was reading a little blurb about you sort of peeking out of your hibernation as some retail opened up in Canada. And did I read correctly that it was John Candy Day?
It's possible. You didn't get that from me, but listen, we're Canadians. We'll grapple with whatever sort of thing.
Best holiday ever. Best holiday ever. Is what was my comment there.
It wasn't from me, Scott, but I'm with you 100%. John Candy Day should be a much larger celebration.
Absolutely.
Today is Remembrance Day as well. So we got a lot of things to say, to look back on and remember John Candy being one for sure.
Yeah, Veterans Day here in the U.S. So it's a very similar holiday today. So, one of the things I heard you say, as I listened to some of the other interviews you've given, especially this was, back right at the start of the pandemic. To paraphrase, you were talking about how if we're not back to normal soon, right, that the some of these psychological shifts in the customer, from the customer's point of view, were going to become permanent. Right, that they weren't going to revert back, and back then, I think the projection was, if we're not normal by June, right, which seems, very optimistic now, looking at where we are today. So would you address that?
Well, I think I sort of did a bit in talking about this experience of what's Double 11's doing in China. Again, they are kind of back to, if anybody's back to normal, whatever the hell that is, now it's them. And there's still, there's still these deep trends that have changed where people have digitized sort of the commodity purchasing and the promotional purchasing. And I it's hard to believe we're going to go back to a world where we're going to be doing all that back in just in, as much in physical as you will. So the curve really, what the overall curve, what it looks like so far, and this is all going to get stretched out, is we went from, I'm just using very broad numbers, 15% online. And in May, we jumped to 30% online. Like in literally, that was the 3 to 5 years in 3 to 5 week analogy. That's the other data point around that acceleration. And over the summer, well, we came back down. I mean, I think I saw numbers as low as maybe 18%, but let's round it out to 20. Now it's starting to build back up again as we ramp up to the Christmas season, where a lot of studies are showing that 50% of transactions for the holiday time will be done online. Not 50% of all consumption we do, but specific to the holidays will be done online. So how do we sort of go back to that? And another part of my thesis around the acceleration and what's provoking it, and maybe going back to questions to what you're asking about, what's, it's not just so first is a consumer behavior that's changing. They're more patient around adopting these new, or forced to adopt these new ways of dealing. My 75-year-old mother-in-law is ordering groceries online now. I mean, that's,
mine as well.
Right. I think that's indicative. But the other one, and I do this in one of my, I do this now in my keynotes, some of my keynotes, is I list the 5 largest companies on the stock exchange by market cap. And then I go through what they all have to gain by pushing this acceleration even harder. So, and who has more resources than those 5? And in there, there's Microsoft, there's Facebook. I mean, all these, so it's not just Amazon, because that's clearly the winner. So, so add to this sort of perfect storm, these tech behemoths, these, untethered tech behemoths. And then obviously in Asia, you have the ones there too. And even here in Canada, people are surprised to learn, what Scott, the largest market cap company in Canada is right now? The largest, it was Royal Bank for the last, I don't know, 100 years, we'll say. I'm exaggerating, but what is 30% higher than Royal Bank today? Shopify.
Wow. Well, it makes sense, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It does make sense, but I wouldn't.
Yeah, trades around 120 billion. Yeah, no, exactly, because they were at half that 6 months ago. So I mean, by all means, let's not take market cap as a proxy for an ultimate proxy for all things. It's sort of a market exuberance and unrealistic at a lot of levels, but it is what it is. It's a market that's still is supposed to reflect a larger trend. So when you get the Shopify's, the Alibabas, and you get your Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, these Google and all these guys saying, okay, what? Guess who's going to win from this acceleration? They raised all their hands and okay, double down on whatever. So Google pulls off the cost of listing their shopping. Facebook acquires Jio in India, which is another absolutely stunning market right now. The Microsoft is trying to hang on, grab any deal it can get. They were trying to get on the TikTok deal. They're pushing Azure to anybody who wants to. So they're like, okay, we got hundreds of millions of dollars that we need to plow into this now because we need to capture that market share. So what are they doing? They're subsidizing these new behaviors, and we're already on their way. So put this together, Scott, and you're back to your long-winded response to your original question. How do we go back to before? I think it's really hard to see a scenario where it goes exactly back, but is it going to be, are we going to be at what we were in May, or maybe might be again in November, December? It's going to be a hybrid. It's going to sort of settle down. And the parallel I make, I think it reflects the retail equation a lot, is the commercial, the office tower equation. So office towers are pretty much empty. They were 100% capacity pre-pandemic, 110% in some markets.
Feels like there's a danger of the collapse of that entire
business. Well, and it's it's going to need to reshuffle. But is it going to stay? Is it going to stay at 10%? No, it's going to go back. I mean, it's going to go back, but it's not going to go back to 100.
Well, maybe we'll get to talk about the office space great apocalypse, and we can stop talking about the retail great apocalypse for a while.
Well, yeah. Well, it's. I mean, they talk about an industry that's going to be going through such a huge shift because. So again, perfect storm for them. So their top 2 sort of income streams are office and retail, right? So and hospitality and whatever. I have a very broad definition of retail, I'm sure, like you do, but so they're having to sort of reinvent, and you can't turn every office tower into a condo complex. So what are they going to do? But that said, these office towers are going to refill slowly once we get to a vaccine or a way of dealing with this pandemic a little more efficiently. Office towers will go back to maybe 2/3, maybe that's still a massive hole. And I think that's sort of the same sort of dynamic we'll see in retail, is that void gets filled by something else. And in retail, it's basically digital commerce, which is blurring into physical anyway. So that difference, that's what I'm looking forward to. Once we get to that magical 50-50 and we just stop talking about the difference altogether and just focus on delivering the experience. But in the meantime, we do have to pay attention to those numbers, and it's fun. It's interesting to look around and see the other industries that are going to sort of have the same realities of how they fill their voids.
So let me give you an opportunity to talk about something that you do talk about often, and that's the Great Acceleration. You describe, these sort of periods in history is almost kind of like, the industrial revolutions are described in different periods. When you're talking about, retail, prior to the Great Depression versus between now and 2008 versus 2008 and the Great Depression, as opposed to what's happening right now. I'd love to, hear more, on this Great Acceleration and how are brands and retailers going to keep up with even more accelerated change, when, they were barely hanging on, by the tips of their fingers at the old accelerated rate of change.
Yeah, and that's a real concern. So maybe just first part, in terms of my analogy and why the Great Acceleration was, because I was thinking of it not so much in the change that was created during the Depression or the recession. It was just sort of the branding of it, how we looked back on those. It was called the Great Depression, it was called the Great Recession, and I was hoping that at least this, what we're still in the midst of right now, we'll look back and think of it as the Great Acceleration, which is sort of the nice way to spin it, quite honestly, because there's obviously some much more difficult ways to look at it. So it's just my way of sort of, wondering how we're going to look back on this period, and not so much a parallel between the changes that happened during these three massive events. But to the question of, how our retailer is going to react to it, my biggest concern is really around, again, I'm going to come back to people. When Virgilie's talking about 3 days to roll out curbside pickup across the Best Buy group in the Northeast, and, that puts a real strain on your people. How often can they repeat that? Does that become what the executive team now thinks is the norm, and whatever the other change initiative they're going to want to do to try to keep up is going to happen, is going to be at breakneck speed, and breakneck, the word implies what can happen, the term implies. So I think, but the reality is, I think what's the good side, and what the reorganizations have noticed, and we've been talking about this for a while, that's why it's an acceleration. Everything we're seeing is nothing we didn't expect to come. It's just happening a lot more quickly, is the fact that the organizations are becoming a lot more lean. They're becoming a lot more focused. They're getting sort of out of their bureaucratic, the good ones at least, or the ones I think that are going to be okay, are trying to get out of their bureaucratic red tape as quickly as possible, because they know that change, that pace can't be held if they have all these old processes in place that were holding them back in the first place. So that's really what it is, and it's a mentality. I teach a marketing course here at McGill for executives at the Executive Institute, and one of my favorite case studies that I bring up is Lululemon, and how this past summer they acquired Mirror. And this was obviously in the works pre-pandemic, so this wasn't necessarily something that they started looking at back in March. I
thought that was a really interesting acquisition, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. So the same here at so many levels, right, Scott? It's you can look at it sort of at the first level and say, oh, it's a cool technology hire, and it gives them access to consumer data and this sort of stuff. But what does it do even culturally for a company that has been very low tech up there? It's all been about yoga studios and offering free classes at night. They haven't been really a technology company. So that, I think, is an example of an acceleration where they probably said, okay, we've been looking at this, we got to do it. It's not perfect. It's not us yet, but if we don't do it now, and I think it's going to play out brilliantly for them, quite honestly. But it's one of my favorite, I think, sort of examples of how right now executive teams are changing. Calvin McDonald, who's leading the team there, knows a lot about this, comes from Sephora and our Loblaws here before that. Really good operator, really good strategist. And I think it's more than an acqui-hire. I think it's more than a technology play. I think it's a really fascinating intersection that speaks to a lot of the trends we're accelerating right now.
Yeah, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? That's, I think about, in my own experience, say 2008, the Great Recession and prior, the typical approach to adversity was, burn the furniture to keep the lights on. Right. And was not necessarily, hey, we need to innovate and be better. What we do, what we need to do is cost cut our way to success. Exactly. Is what it felt like. And with this period we're in now, it seems like innovate and be better than your competitors' approach to it has finally won, right? It's finally come to the forefront.
Yeah, and be open to change, right? And the thing, even these 4 leaders I had yesterday, I mean, when they, the day after basically they went into lockdown, all the virtual hands they had at their team was like, take your job descriptions and throw them in the garbage, because I'm telling you, for the next foreseeable future, everybody's got to do what has to be done, and we're all going to we're going to go and try new things. We're going to go in new directions, and they were talking of the partnerships that they were exploring. The idea of us, I think about that, your sports bar where you go for your beer and wings, now offering a meal kit service. I mean, these are things where you can imagine the faces are on the table when the first person comes up with that idea. A year ago, they would have got laughed out of the room. And now it's like, okay, let's think this through. What does this mean? What does it imply? What are the resources it's going to take? How does this fit our brand? Can we, and back to your previous question, what is the future of that? What's the new normal? Are they going to pull that all out? If this meal kit that they now do they can do virtual office parties with, they do all these cool things. Is that all going to get this, pulled off once, they can reopen the restaurants at 100% capacity? They'd be crazy to, because they've already built this thing up. And one of the analogies that we were pulling around often is a lot of people were sitting on one one leg chairs. I mean, they had the one leg was a solid leg, and you could keep them, but they realize now that they needed more legs to stabilize the chair. So a lot of them were, one of them was starting to sell into major grocery, which had never done before. Explored that option. Another one, one B2C, was a pure B2B model, pivoted to a B2C model. It's building. I started off talking about resilience, so I think that's really what these examples speak of. Is you need to have, but you need the team, you need the people, you need the spirit to set it, kind of broaden your horizons and say, okay, as in the mirror case, Lululemon, okay, this isn't so crazy after all. This might make sense, and that's sort of the peak of what that could, the possibilities could be. But a sports bar chain selling, meal kits for chicken wings and fried whatever, I mean, is now part of the norm too.
I'd like to ask you one question then, Carl, if I may jump in, Scott. It's more like about the future of jobs, as well as how you see if retailers are becoming more lean, as you said, and I think there's a demand for people, with higher technological skills, and I'm curious to hear your take on that.
Absolutely. Well, sort of 2 things happening there, Carlos. So on one side, definitely, the argument, if you look at those top, highest market cap companies, the reason they're so successful is they've been able to attract that talent that basically allows them to build better algorithms than anybody else. And it makes it really hard for the rest of the industry to come even near to that talent. So if you're a Neiman Marcus, or you're forget about a JCPenney, but let's think about even a Nordstrom or a decent retailer, and you're going after a data scientist right now, and Amazon's interested in that same data scientist, guess who's going to get, guess where
right, yeah,
and end up. So, and it's something that I mentioned earlier, I do work with McGill University here. We have a school, a retail management school. It's something we often bring up to the employers, saying, listen, our top data science students that are coming out of McGill, And we're trying to entice them and show them that they didn't even know that retail was an option for them, really. I mean, they just thought that they were all going to end up working at Google. And so we're like, no, retailers have, really deep needs for very talented data scientists. And we have a group here in Montreal called Aldo Group, which is a shoe retailer, 3,600 stores around Canada. I mean, they're struggling to hang on to those data scientists because how can a shoe retailer offer pretty much vice president level salary packages to a master's student in data science, which is almost what it's got to. But the second part, so that's already a tough one, and there could be some arguments made around using third-party services and working with technology companies to support that, and so there are workarounds. The other part, what I think is even more interesting, is the associate level, and how can you empower them with this technology. So I think clienteling tools are going to become really, really powerful. So as we downsize, you're saying, we sort of reduce our floor space and our headcount in the floor space. You need to sort of increase the talent level of those people without them being MIT data scientists. They can, but they need to sort of have these tools, and I know, all the different department store luxury like Emmons and Saks and all that have been working with such tools so that these associates can become very digitally empowered to be able to maintain a better relationship with their customers. So it's happening sort of on both of those fronts, and they're converging because one sort of leads to the other anyways. Those clienteling tools, obviously give you a lot of data that you can do more things with, but you need sort of that connective tissue. And I've been speaking for a while about how we're blurring this digital physical to the 50-50 where it doesn't matter anymore. That's a perfect example of that, because that associate is another person that's throwing their job description out the window right now.
Let's talk about the 50-50, which I assume, we're talking 50% physical, 50% digital, sort of a split between how I interact with my customers, and I, my time, at Neiman Marcus, I think when I left, we were about 35% digital, and we were well ahead of what our competitors were doing, having been a very early adopter of e-commerce, number one, and actually, despite some of the maybe not good technology decisions that got made, here and there over the years, one of the things they definitely embraced was data science, and understood the importance of that mechanism to understand the customer. There was no doubt about it. In fact, my first job at Emmons when I came there was I was brought on for a 2-week engagement to help them with business intelligence, which is kind of what we used to call data science.
Well, and hopefully we revert back to that, because I think sometimes we've penduled a little too hard on the data science and sort of forgot about the business intelligence piece of it. But
yeah. So, I guess my question, that was a long-winded, description to get to the question, which is, with, how important that digital commerce piece is becoming, how can, the retailer continue to deliver the personalization, the authenticity, the empathy, what, we called at Neiman's the white glove service, when I'm dealing with digital customers, because I think a lot of those experiences fall short.
Yeah, and they were sort of hard to acquire before. So one of my major endeavors here since the beginning of the pandemic is I'm working with a provincial innovation center, where we realized quickly, especially the smaller size retailers were undergunned when it came to the digital tools. And the reason most of them, they thought they weren't acquirable. They thought that only Apple and Emmons and these, large, sophisticated retailers could pull together the technology stack that you would need to offer VIP white glove service, book an appointment, have the delivery follow later on, it has different engagement tools, all this sort of the nice suite of, which were, when you're, with Neiman or Apple, these are all sort of custom made tools that cost millions and millions of dollars that are now basically, software as a service tools, on the cloud that you can get for $30 a month in some cases. So that was sort of the mission we gave ourselves at the center, saying, okay, how quickly can we get this out to the small retailers to show them that these tools are no longer, you don't have to be a multi-billion-dollar organization or hundreds of millions to afford these. If if you can afford a $50 a month subscription, and you just
maybe not even that, maybe it's $10 a month now.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think we built an amazing mobile CRM for our associates. It's amazing, what it can do.
Yeah.
Lots of time and money and effort were spent doing it, and we were first to market with it. But you know what? You can buy those same capabilities, like I said, for $10 a month now, as a mobile subscription. And guess what? You don't have to spend all the time and effort maintaining it, and you can, focus on being a better retailer as opposed to being a better technologist. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's still a struggle. I mean, even if sometimes it's not just the cost, it's not the $10 a month, it's the mindset, right? And they're like, listen, I struggle enough keeping up with my day-to-day business and making sure the lights are turned on and my shelves are stocked. I don't have time to start fooling around with these digital toys. And they're like, well, your customers fooling around with those digital toys, and you're going to have to find a way to maybe, yes, you still need to keep the lights on and the shelves stocked, but you're going to have to sort of reallocate how you resource time and people to sort of support these tools. And thankfully there's tools that are even making that part of it easier, that's automating a lot. So for instance, we have these chatbots now because we realize that 80% of the conversations in these new digital channels were repetitive, and the same thing. What time's the store open? What time do you close tonight? Do you have this in stock? You don't necessarily need a human answering those. And again, they're not
sometimes there should at least be okay, look, I'm in that business now, actually. I would love to. The idea of this podcast was not to be a commercial for me, but I'd love to have a long discussion with you about that, because that's what I, pretty much am doing for a living lately. Right. Is that, AI assisted, bot assisted, but with humans at the ready, kind of communication, right?
Oh yeah. And it's all about empowering, right? I mean, it's all, you probably met Kyle Nell, who was running Lowe's.
Oh yes, I did. I was a fanboy of,
right,
especially of the budget he got compared to mine. It was amazing. So
you weren't printing 3D tools in the space station. But he, what I liked a lot was he was talking about the early robots they had and how they were, people saw, the associates are going to hate the robots because they're going to steal their jobs. And he's like, no, they're actually taking away the boring stuff that the associate hates doing, showing the person where this screw is or where that hammer is, and helping them build a deck instead, which is what their associate, or at least the right associate, should really want to do. And that's the way I see technology. I think technology needs to be, taking away the mundane and the repetitive, because that's what technology is good at. And allow the human empathy and the shine and the knowledge. And building a deck is a lot more complicated. You could train AI to show how to build a deck eventually, but there's so many different configurations and there's so many different variables and conditions. You sort of need the human to really step in quickly in that equation, beyond choosing what screw size and what 2x4s you need. But that's really where I think this assisted world is going, and that's why that blurring becomes more and more fascinating as well.
Yeah, and yet, this very week, we see, the headline, Walmart fires Bossa Nova because the humans can count the shelf stuff better, right? And I would imagine it's probably not even better. I would imagine it's probably cheaper.
I think there was a backstory to that. I remember one of the first reports was that these robots were driving the associates crazy because they kept on beeping and sirens kept on going off because they kept on finding shortages and things like that, and it was driving the people crazy. So at some management level, they said it's either we're going to come to a head here where people are either going to start tearing these things apart, or we're going to have to sort of pull the plug and find a better way to do it. But it's iterative. I mean, hats off to Walmart. Quite honest, we didn't talk about Walmart.
Oh no, absolutely. Look, I think that as much as you've mentioned many times, how willing Amazon is to go invest in experimentation, right, and to invest. They have 50 experiments going on at any given time, and only one of them is going to actually end up being the thing. But it's a really big thing, when they find it. Right. And I think Walmart is replicating, very, closely that model as well. It feels like it anyway.
And that you just put a finger on something we haven't talked about, but that's really probably the biggest resistance to change, and why, the companies are going to fail is Amazon, when one of those 50 that, would hit it out of the park, they wouldn't fire the 49 other project leads, as traditionally would happen in our regular business environment, where they say, okay, that person gets promoted to vice president, and the other 49 others got to go find a job. That we know that destroys innovation. So Walmart's come around to that. Other organizations are embracing that, saying, listen, we know that 80%, 90% of what we're going to do is going to fail, and we're fine with that, because that's the only way we're going to get the 10 or 20% that's actually going to make a difference. And that sort of relates back to my cultural thing earlier, but it just, you nailed it there, Scott, because that really is the difference right now, and why. And now the larger companies have obviously embraced this a long time ago, and now the others need to catch up and do the same.
All right, well, the time has really flown by, and I want to make sure we get to this last little section. I was out just sort of, Googling around, seeing, what interesting things could, have you been up to that we could talk about today. Just wanted to, get up to current. And I came across this podcast that was entitled, "Should I Build an Innovation Lab?" And obviously with my background, I was drawn to that like a moth to a candle. And it was very interesting. I listened to the whole, it was pretty long, 45-minute thing, because it was a very interesting topic from my perspective. So, the kind of the golden age of, retailers all building their own innovation labs and, running around tooting their horns about, all the amazing things that they're doing, at the Target Innovation Lab, or the Nordstrom Innovation Lab, or even the Neiman Marcus Innovation Lab. Those have all pretty much, more or less gone away for the most part. So how do we do it today? What's the right way to do that, to make sure that you have a solid and ongoing innovation program at your brand?
Oh yeah, that's a long question to end off with, and we'll plug in Ib's podcast there. Maybe part of this is his School of Innovation. Yeah. But it's interesting because since I did that, I think we did that late in the summer, and I'm doing some other stuff with Yaniv, who was, by the way, led Future Group's Innovation Lab. You remember the Explorium we were all talking about 3-4 years ago? Yeah, that was him. That was his project. So that's how he and I connected at first as well. And interestingly enough, I'm actually in the midst of sort of launching 2 other ones right now. One that I've been advising for McGill for a couple of years now, and it's finally, just because of this pandemic, got drawn up. We have a fascinating, very academic one. So there's how this is, Scott. I mean, there's no single answer. What is the best way? What is the future of? There's several futures and several. It's
not cookie cutter. It's not
cookie cutter at all. So in one end, I have a very academic, long horizon, very deep sort of research facility. Really, that I think you almost need to be hosted in a university, quite honestly, because you have access to that sort of those resources of people and money and all that, because it's substantial, and they're among the rare people that don't necessarily care so much about the next quarter. So that's a great place for that kind of research to happen, and it's going to be fascinating. And I mean, the day they announced they were doing it, I was in the office of the associate dean saying, "How can I help?" Because I've been close to the labs for a long time as well. And then sort of with the center I was mentioning earlier, we're doing one as an extension of part of a shop local project that we're trying to sort of support back to those local retailers. And we've gone around and promoted these technologies, and we'll say, okay, we need to find a place to house the technologies. Now, have the local business owners come and experiment with them. And at the same time, we'll promote local goods. So it'll play sort of a double effect. And listen, we'll see, it's an experiment. So we got some, much smaller resources than what the university has, with a much less, academic or deep knowledge. It's very, it's very much supporting the technology companies, quite honestly. We said, what can we do to help you? Because we need you to connect with the retail community a bit more. So we create a space like that, which is more the traditional sort of, and it's short term. That's going to be 3 to 4 months, and then we're gone. So there's a lot of different manifestations, and I think it really depends on the resources at hand and the outcomes you're looking for. But one thing for sure is I'm a big fan of iteration. So I think that's going to be sort of key in most of the environments. But something like McGill is doing is going to be less iterative, because the research is deep. So you can't keep shifting variables as much as you would in something that doesn't require the same academic depth.
Cross-pollination versus practical experimentation.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I'm a big fan of intersections too. I think, that's what I like to create. So
I think my best ideas at, when I, doing innovation for Neiman Marcus were cross-pollinated from things that weren't retail, to be quite honest. Oh yeah. That was a greenfield. So, all right. Well, I think, we are, at the end of our time together. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think there's a lot left to talk about, and, maybe down the road we can get together again and, continue the conversation. I'd love the opportunity to do that. Carlos, I'll turn it over to you to take us out.
Sure. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. Carl, if folks out there, they want to know more about you, and there's the book as well. How can people find you?
I think LinkedIn is still probably the primary way where I'm most active as well. Twitter with Carl with a C, Boutet, Boutet. I'm pretty sure it'll be in your show notes anyways. So yeah, please reach out.
Absolutely. So thanks very much. It was fantastic.